I never thought my engagement would become a battleground, but that's exactly what happened when Victoria Collins decided I wasn't good enough for her brother. My name is Olivia Mitchell, and at 29, I thought I had finally found everything I ever wanted. A fulfilling career in marketing, the love of my life in James Collins, and the promise of a family that would finally feel like home. The day James proposed was the happiest of my life. He got down on one knee at sunset on the beach, waves crashing behind us, and promised me forever. When he slipped that gorgeous emerald-cut diamond on my finger, I couldn't stop the tears. "I can't wait to make you a Collins," he had whispered, and my heart soared at the thought of belonging. I'd met his family several times before, and while his parents Eleanor and Richard seemed reserved but polite, his sister Victoria had always been difficult. There was something in the way she looked at me during family dinners, a slight curl of her lip when I spoke, the way she'd interrupt me mid-sentence or reference inside family jokes I couldn't possibly understand. I tried to brush it off, to make excuses for her behavior. Maybe she was just protective of her brother. Maybe she needed time to warm up to me. But the night of our engagement party changed everything. The Collins family estate was transformed into a fairy tale setting, with twinkling lights and champagne flowing freely as we celebrated our upcoming union. I was floating on air until Victoria cornered me near the garden, champagne flute in hand, and a cold smile on her face. "Enjoying yourself?" she'd asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. When I nodded, her expression hardened. "Don't get too comfortable. You're not family yet," she said, her eyes locked on mine. "And to be honest, you never will be." Those words cut deeper than any knife, sending ice through my veins in an instant. That night marked the beginning of a war I never wanted to fight, with stakes higher than I ever imagined. And standing there in my beautiful dress, surrounded by flowers and congratulations, I had no idea how much worse it would get, or how dramatically I would eventually have to stand up for myself. Family had always been a complicated concept for me. Growing up in the foster care system meant I never had the stability most people take for granted. From age 7, after my parents died in a car accident, I bounced between 5 different foster homes. Some were decent, others were nightmares I still can't talk about without my voice shaking. The last family I stayed with, the Thompsons, were kind, but never quite managed to make me feel like I truly belonged. When I aged out of the system at 18, I threw myself into building a life. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college, graduated with honors, and climbed the corporate ladder with a determination born from knowing that nobody else would create the life I wanted. By 28, I was a marketing executive at a respected firm in Boston, with my own apartment and a small circle of loyal friends. But there was always this emptiness, this yearning for the kind of family bond I'd missed out on. Then I met James at a charity auction my company was sponsoring. He was there representing his family's foundation, and our eyes met across the room in that cliché but utterly real way that changes everything. Tall, with kind eyes and an easy laugh, James was the sort of person who made everyone feel important. Our first date lasted 6 hours, starting with dinner and ending with a walk along the river at midnight, neither of us wanting the night to end. His background couldn't have been more different from mine. The Collins family had old money, a sprawling estate outside the city, and the kind of tight-knit family dynamic I had always dreamed about. Sunday dinners were sacred. Holidays were elaborate affairs filled with traditions, and the family had a shared history that stretched back generations. When James first invited me to a family dinner 3 months into our relationship, I spent hours choosing the right outfit, practicing what I'd say, desperate to make a good impression. His parents, Eleanor and Richard, were polite, if somewhat formal. Richard asked thoughtful questions about my work, while Eleanor complimented my dress with a slightly evaluating gaze. But Victoria, James's older sister by 2 years, watched me like a hawk circling its prey. She asked pointed questions about my background, her eyebrows rising slightly when I mentioned foster care. "How interesting," she'd said, in a tone that suggested it was anything but. Over the next few months, as my relationship with James deepened, Victoria's microaggressions became a constant undercurrent. She'd accidentally exclude me from family photo opportunities, mention James's ex-girlfriend Caroline's accomplishments at random moments, or helpfully explain family customs to me as if I were a particularly slow child. "Victoria's just protective," James would say when I cautiously brought up her behavior. "She'll warm up to you, I promise." I wanted to believe him so badly. I tried everything to win her over. I invited her to lunch, asked her opinion on things, brought thoughtful gifts to family gatherings. When James and I moved in together after a year of dating, I even asked Victoria for decorating advice, hoping to build a bridge. She showed up with a portfolio of ideas that completely disregarded everything I'd said I liked, and then seemed offended when I gently suggested alternatives. "Well, I suppose if that's what you want," she said with a tight smile. "I just thought, you might want the apartment to have some class." Caroline had such exquisite taste. Despite everything, I held on to hope. When James proposed after 2 years together, whispering promises of forever on our favorite hiking trail as the sun set behind the mountains, I said yes with my whole heart. Maybe once we were married, once I was officially a Collins, Victoria would finally accept me. Maybe then I would finally have the family I had always longed for. Little did I know that my engagement ring wasn't a ticket to acceptance, but the beginning of the most challenging test of my self-worth I would ever face. The day after James proposed at our favorite hiking spot, we drove to his parents' house to share the news in person. I remember being so nervous my palms were sweating as we pulled into the long driveway leading to the Collins family estate. The house was a beautiful Georgian-style mansion that had been in their family for generations, with perfectly manicured gardens and a grand entrance that still intimidated me despite my many visits. Eleanor answered the door herself, which was unusual, and I wondered if James had given her a heads up about our news. Her smile seemed genuine as she hugged her son, though her embrace with me was noticeably briefer. Richard emerged from his study, reading glasses perched on his nose, and gave James a hearty handshake before kissing my cheek. "Victoria's in the sunroom," Eleanor said, leading us through the house. "She's just returned from her trip to Milan." The sunroom was flooded with light, highlighting Victoria's perfect posture as she sat flipping through a fashion magazine. She looked up, her eyes immediately landing on my left hand where the emerald-cut diamond sparkled. Something flickered across her face so quickly I almost missed it. Displeasure? Shock? But then it was gone, replaced by a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, well," she said, standing to air-kiss James's cheeks. "I had a feeling this visit might be special." She turned to me, her gaze calculating. "Congratulations, Olivia. I suppose we'll be seeing even more of you now." The emphasis she placed on more made it sound like a burden rather than a pleasure. James, either oblivious to or ignoring the undercurrent, beamed and launched into the story of his proposal. Victoria listened, occasionally interjecting with comments like, "Really? James? I thought you were planning something more elaborate," or, "That ring is certainly unique. Did Olivia pick it out herself?" Each comment felt like a tiny needle, but I smiled through it, determined not to let her ruin this special moment. The rest of the afternoon unfolded with champagne and tentative wedding discussions. Eleanor immediately suggested their family's country club for the venue, while Richard began talking about having his golf buddies from the board of directors attend. Victoria remained mostly silent, watching the proceedings with a slight smirk, until the conversation turned to the wedding party. "Of course Victoria will be your maid of honor, right, Olivia?" Eleanor said, not really asking so much as stating what she assumed was obvious. Before I could respond that I'd actually planned to ask my best friend Maya, Victoria cut in. "I'd be happy to step in since I'm not sure Olivia has many long-term friends." The implication that my foster care background meant I couldn't maintain relationships hung in the air. James squeezed my hand under the table but said nothing to contradict his sister. That pattern continued in the weeks that followed. Victoria appointed herself unofficial wedding coordinator, creating a group text with me, James, and his parents, where she'd send daily ideas that completely contradicted my vision. When I mentioned wanting a small, intimate ceremony at a historic greenhouse I'd fallen in love with, Victoria sent links to the grandest ballrooms in the city. "The Collins family has a reputation to maintain," she wrote. "We can't have people thinking James is having some backyard wedding." I tried to stand my ground, scheduling appointments to see venues I liked, only to arrive and find Victoria had already been there, telling owners the booking would be under the Collins name and making completely different arrangements. She'd show up at every vendor meeting, interrupting when I spoke and making decisions without consulting me. "You don't understand our family traditions," she'd say dismissively. "James's cousin had her centerpieces like this, and his other cousin had this specific menu. We can't break tradition." James noticed my growing frustration but continually downplayed it. She's just excited, he'd say. And honestly, she knows what will make my parents happy. Maybe we should compromise on some things? Each compromise felt like a small piece of my dream slipping away. The situation escalated when we had dinner with James's extended family to announce our engagement. Victoria had somehow ensured I was seated at the opposite end of the table from James, next to a particularly judgmental great-aunt who spent the entire meal asking if my family had any breeding at all. When the conversation turned to wedding planning, Victoria loudly mentioned that she'd taken the liberty of revising our guest list. I added about 50 people from Dad's business connections and Mom's charity board, she announced. And I invited Caroline too, James. I hope that's okay. You two have such history. It would be a shame not to have her there. The table fell awkwardly silent as James looked between me and his sister. I don't think that's necessary, Vic, he finally said, but the damage was done. I could feel tears threatening, but refused to cry in front of this family. Later that night, in the privacy of our apartment, I confronted James about Victoria's behavior. She's deliberately trying to take over our wedding, I said. And inviting your ex-girlfriend? James, that's crossing a line. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Victoria can be intense, I know, but she doesn't mean harm. Caroline and I have been broken up for years and they're still friends. Victoria probably just didn't think about how it might make you feel. But that's the problem, I insisted. She's not thinking about my feelings at all. This is our wedding, not hers. James pulled me into a hug that was meant to be comforting but felt somehow dismissive. Let's just try to keep the peace, okay? The wedding is just one day. We have our whole lives ahead of us. His words should have reassured me, but instead they planted a seed of doubt. If James wouldn't stand up for me now, would he ever? And if Victoria was this controlling about the wedding, what would she be like once I was officially part of the family? Little did I know, the engagement party would provide those answers in the most painful way possible. The Collins family spared no expense for our engagement party. Their estate was transformed with thousands of twinkling lights, cascading floral arrangements, and a champagne fountain that sparkled under the stars. A string quartet played softly, in the background, as waiters circulated with trays of elaborate hors d'oeuvres. I'd spent weeks finding the perfect dress, a champagne-colored silk that made me feel like I belonged in this world of wealth and privilege. James's parents had invited over 200 people, most of whom I'd never met, a fact that left me clutching my fiancé's arm as we greeted an endless stream of business associates, distant relatives, and family friends. You look beautiful, James whispered periodically, giving my hand reassuring squeezes. Everyone loves you. I wanted desperately to believe him, especially when Eleanor introduced me to her garden club friends with an almost warm, "This is Olivia, the girl who's stolen our James's heart." The evening progressed smoothly until about 2 hours in, when James was pulled away by his father to meet an important business connection. "I'll be right back," he promised, kissing my cheek before disappearing into the crowd. I found myself suddenly alone, smiling awkwardly at people who viewed me with curious, assessing gazes. I was making my way toward the bar when Victoria appeared beside me, looking stunning in a designer gown that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary. "Enjoying yourself?" she asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's wonderful," I replied sincerely, hoping we might share a positive moment. "The decorations are beautiful. Thank you for all your help arranging everything." Victoria took a slow sip of her champagne, her gaze traveling over my dress with a slightly curled lip. "James looks happy," she said finally. "Though I must say, I've never seen him go for someone so different from his usual type." My smile faltered slightly. Different can be good, right? Victoria's laugh was like ice cracking. "That depends. The Collins family has certain standards, Olivia. Traditions that go back generations. It takes a special kind of person to truly fit in here." She gestured around at the opulent surroundings. "This isn't just about marrying, James. It's about becoming part of a legacy." Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. "I love James," I said simply. "The rest will come with time." Victoria's expression hardened as she moved closer, lowering her voice. "Let's cut the pretense, shall we? We both know what this is about. A girl from your background with no family connections, no real pedigree to speak of, suddenly landing one of Boston's most eligible bachelors. It's quite the fairy tale." The cruelty in her words left me momentarily speechless. That's not fair, I finally managed. James and I love each other. That's all that matters. Oh, sweetie, Victoria said with mock sympathy, placing a manicured hand on my arm. Love is such a temporary emotion. Do you really think it's enough to overcome everything else? You don't fit here. You never will. You're not family yet, and, to be honest, you never will be. Not really. Her words hit me like physical blows, each one perfectly aimed at my deepest insecurities. The invitations, the venue tours, even tonight, she continued, gesturing around us. I've been watching you try so hard to belong, and it's almost sad, like watching someone wear shoes 2 sizes too small and pretending they're comfortable. I became aware that a few nearby guests had gone quiet, obviously listening to our exchange. The humiliation burned through me as I fought to maintain my composure. You don't know anything about me or what James and I share, I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. Victoria's smile was pure venom. I know my brother. I know he goes through phases. Remember his artist period in college? Or when he dated that jazz singer? You're just his latest rebellion against the family expectations. Once the novelty wears off, he'll come to his senses. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I refused to break down in front of her. Excuse me, I whispered, turning to leave before she could see how deeply she'd wounded me. Oh, and Olivia? Victoria called after me, loud enough for others to hear. That champagne color really does wash you out. Caroline would never have made such a basic fashion mistake. I locked myself in the powder room, hands trembling as I gripped the marble countertop, struggling to regain my composure. My reflection showed mascara slightly smudged beneath one eye, and I carefully blotted it away, refusing to let Victoria's cruelty ruin the entire evening. When I finally emerged, James was waiting in the hallway, his expression concerned. There you are, he said, reaching for my hand. Dad wouldn't stop talking. Are you okay? You look upset. Your sister, I began, but found I couldn't repeat, her words without risking fresh tears. Victoria said some really hurtful things to me just now. James's expression clouded. What kind of things? I told him, watching his face for outrage, for the protective anger I desperately needed to see. Instead, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I was beginning to recognize as his response to conflict. She doesn't mean it, he said finally. Victoria's always been protective of me, and she sometimes says things without thinking. I'm sure she was just trying to make sure your intentions are good. The fact that he could even question my intentions after 2 years together felt like a betrayal all its own. James, she deliberately humiliated me in front of your family and friends. She said I'd never truly be a Collins. His expression softened as he pulled me into a hug. You will be, though. Once we're married, all of this will settle down. Victoria, we'll see how happy you make me, and she'll come around. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But as we rejoined the party, Victoria caught my eye across the room and raised her champagne glass in a mock toast, her smile triumphant. For the first time since James had proposed, I found myself wondering if saying yes had been a mistake. Not because I didn't love him, but because loving him might mean a lifetime of fighting for a place in a family determined to see me as an outsider. That night, lying awake beside James while he slept peacefully, I faced an uncomfortable truth. The engagement party hadn't just been a celebration of our future together. It had been the opening salvo in a war I never wanted to fight, with my sense of self-worth as the battlefield. After the engagement party, I foolishly hoped Victoria might back off, that perhaps getting her hostility out in the open would somehow clear the air. I couldn't have been more wrong. If anything, her campaign against me intensified, becoming more strategic and relentless. The first major incident happened during our registry appointment at an upscale department store. We had scheduled a private consultation, and I arrived early, excited to select items for our future home together. James was running late from a meeting, so I waited in the designated area, flipping through catalogs of fine china and crystal. Victoria appeared suddenly, sliding into the seat beside me as if she'd been invited. James asked me to step in since he's delayed, she said smoothly when I questioned her presence. He knows I have an eye for quality. Before I could object, our consultant arrived, and Victoria immediately took control, introducing herself as the sister and wedding coordinator while barely acknowledging my existence. For the next 2 hours, she steamrolled every preference I expressed, insisting on formal china patterns I found ostentatious and crystals so delicate it seemed impractical. The Collins family entertains frequently, she explained to the consultant. Olivia doesn't understand yet what that entails. When I tried to add some more casual, everyday items to the registry, Victoria laughed dismissively. Those are so quaint, but hardly appropriate. We can put those on a separate registry for your more budget-conscious friends. By the time James arrived, apologizing profusely for his delay, Victoria had essentially created a registry that reflected nothing of my taste or our needs as a couple. When I tried to explain this to James later, he seemed distracted and unconcerned. If it means that much to you, we can go back and adjust some things, he said, not looking up from his laptop. But honestly, Liv, does it really matter what pattern the plates have? His dismissal hurt more than Victoria's interference. A week later, I discovered that Victoria had somehow gained access to our wedding planning spreadsheet and deleted months of my research and notes, replacing them with her own selections. When confronted, she feigned innocence. Oh, I thought you'd want the updated information. Your original choices were so limited. The situation escalated further when wedding shower invitations went out, organized entirely by Victoria without my input. The theme she'd chosen, Collins family traditions, felt deliberately exclusionary. The event itself was even worse, held at the Collins Country Club and structured around family customs I knew nothing about. Victoria had prepared a quiz for the guests about Collins family history, ensuring I failed publicly and repeatedly. Don't worry, she told me loudly as I fumbled another answer. You have plenty of time to learn all this. Though Caroline knew most of it already, even before she and James were engaged. The gasp from several guests confirmed what I'd suspected. Victoria had deliberately let slip that James had been previously engaged, a fact he'd mentioned to me but had asked his family not to discuss publicly since it ended badly. The humiliation burned as I felt curious eyes evaluating me against this unknown predecessor. The gifts at the shower were another calculated move. Victoria had apparently told guests to ignore our registry entirely, resulting in an array of Collins family-specific items, monogrammed linens with the family crest, heirloom-quality serving, pieces that matched Eleanor's collection, and a formal portrait of the Collins ancestral home that Victoria suggested would look perfect in your foyer to remind James of his roots. Each gift felt less like a celebration of our upcoming marriage and more like a pointed reminder that I was an outsider, trying to enter a world that didn't want me. The social media campaign was subtler, but equally devastating. Victoria began posting throwback photos of family events, always including several of James with Caroline, using captions like, "Remembering simpler times," or "When the family was all on the same page." She never mentioned me directly, but the timing and frequency of these posts made their intended message clear. The final straw came when she began the wedding emergency text chain, excluding me but including James, his parents, and key family members. Here she shared concerns about various wedding decisions, presenting my choices as problematic and suggesting alternatives that were more appropriate for a Collins wedding. I discovered this chain only when James's phone buzzed, repeatedly during dinner one night, and I glimpsed Victoria's name with the message, "Another disaster averted." Convinced the florist to use proper arrangements instead of Olivia's wildflower idea. Crisis the 23 solved. When I confronted James about the text chain, he seemed genuinely conflicted for the first time. Victoria is going overboard, he admitted. But she's just trying to help in her own way. My parents are contributing a lot financially, and they have certain expectations. But it's our wedding, I insisted, fighting back tears of frustration. Don't you want it to reflect us, not just your family traditions? James pulled me into a hug that felt more like a way to avoid eye contact than genuine comfort. Of course, I do. But maybe some battles aren't worth fighting? In the grand scheme of things, does it matter if the flowers are wildflowers or roses? Each small surrender felt like I was losing pieces of myself, compromising not just on wedding details, but on my very right to have an equal voice in our relationship. Meanwhile, Victoria continued sending inappropriate engagement gifts to our apartment. A book on proper etiquette with passages highlighted, family photo albums with Caroline prominently featured, and even a DNA test kit with a note saying, "Thought you might want to discover if you have any notable ancestry after all." Each gift arrived with a saccharine note signed, "From your future sister, who only wants the best for the family." James would shake his head at these misguided gestures but never confronted his sister directly. Instead, he suggested I simply return the gifts or donate them, avoiding conflict. But conflict was becoming unavoidable as the wedding date approached. and Victoria's interference grew more aggressive. The constant undermining and microaggressions were taking their toll on me emotionally. I found myself second-guessing every decision, withdrawing from friends who grew tired of hearing about wedding drama, and losing sleep over what should have been the happiest time of my life. What scared me most was how I was beginning to see myself through Victoria's eyes, unworthy, unsuitable, an interloper in the perfect Collins family narrative. The confident, self-assured woman I had worked so hard to become was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone constantly seeking approval and afraid to speak her mind. As I sat alone in our apartment one night, staring at the latest passive-aggressive gift from Victoria, I wondered how much more I could take before something inside me broke completely, or worse, before I accepted that perhaps Victoria was right about me all along. 6 months into our engagement, with the wedding just 3 months away, Victoria's campaign reached a breaking point. I arrived at a scheduled meeting with our wedding planner, excited to finalize some details that still felt authentically us, despite all the compromises. When I walked into the planner's office, I found Victoria already seated there, a portfolio open between her and the planner, who looked uncomfortable. "Oh, Olivia," Victoria said with false surprise. "I didn't realize you'd be joining us today." I looked between them in confusion. "I had an appointment scheduled," I said. "Why are you here, Victoria?" Our planner, Melissa, cleared her throat. "I received an email from Eleanor saying that you'd appointed Victoria as the primary coordinator going forward, to streamline communication." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. "I never agreed to that," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. Victoria smiled sympathetically at Melissa. "Family miscommunication, I'm afraid. Olivia has been so stressed with work lately. Mom thought it would be helpful to take some pressure off." Before I could respond, Victoria continued. "I've taken the liberty of making some necessary changes. The venue you selected was simply too small for the guest list, so I've moved us to the grand ballroom at the Ritz. Much more appropriate for a Collins wedding." "You changed our venue?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "But we put a deposit down. We signed a contract." Victoria waved a dismissive hand. "All handled. Daddy knows the owner of the historic place you chose. He was very understanding about the situation." As Victoria continued detailing the changes she'd made, each word hit like another nail in the coffin of my wedding dreams. She'd changed the flowers from my chosen wildflower arrangements to formal rose displays. The menu had been completely revamped from our farm-to-table concept to a traditional 5-course formal dinner. Even our cake design had been scrapped, in favor of a replica of the cake served at every Collins family wedding for the past 3 generations. "And I've adjusted the seating chart," Victoria added, sliding a diagram across the table. "I moved your college friends to the back near the kitchen. We needed those prime tables for Dad's business associates." I scanned the chart in disbelief, noticing that my small circle of friends had been relegated to the worst tables in the room, while the front was filled with names I didn't recognize. And there, at table 3, prominently placed, was a name that made my blood run cold. Caroline Whitman, James's ex-girlfriend. "You invited Caroline to our wedding?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Victoria had the audacity to look offended. "Of course, she's practically family. James dated her for 5 years, they were engaged for 1. Everyone expected them to marry until she got that job offer in London." This was news to me. James had mentioned dating Caroline seriously, but had never disclosed they were actually engaged. I felt sick as Victoria continued. "Caroline's back in Boston now, actually. We had lunch last week. She's looking forward to the wedding. Says she has no hard feelings about you and James." The room seemed to spin around me. I excused myself, fled to the restroom, and promptly emptied the contents of my stomach. When I returned, shaking but determined, I found Victoria showing Melissa photos on her phone. "These are from James's cousin's wedding. See how elegant the classic Collins table settings are compared to those bohemian ideas Olivia had?" Summoning every ounce of courage, I interrupted. "Melissa, could you give us a minute, please?" The wedding planner, clearly sensing the tension, nodded and quickly left the room. As soon as the door closed, I turned to Victoria. "This ends now. You had no right to change our venue, our flowers, our menu, or anything else. And you absolutely had no right to invite James's ex-fiancée to our wedding." Victoria's expression hardened, the polite facade dropping entirely. "Don't be so dramatic. Olivia, I'm doing you a favor. Left to your own devices, you'd embarrass yourself and the entire Collins family with your lack of taste and understanding of our traditions. It's my wedding, I insisted, voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Mine and James's. Not yours, not your parents'. Victoria laughed, a cold sound entirely devoid of humor. How naive you are. Collins' weddings are family affairs. They're about maintaining connections, upholding traditions, and ensuring the family's social standing. Your input is quaint, but hardly relevant in the grand scheme of things. She gathered her papers, tucking them into an expensive leather portfolio. You should be grateful, really. I'm saving you from yourself. Can you imagine how uncomfortable it would be for you if the wedding was a social failure? People would talk for years. The condescension in her tone pushed me past my breaking point. Why are you doing this? What have I ever done to make you hate me so much? Victoria's expression shifted, something almost vulnerable flashing in her eyes before the mask of contempt returned. Hate you? I don't care enough about you to hate you, Olivia. I'm protecting my family from an obvious gold digger who managed to manipulate my brother. The accusation stunned me. Gold digger? I have my own career, my own money. Please, Victoria scoffed. We both know exactly what you're after. A foster kid with no family suddenly landing one of Boston's most eligible bachelors. The Collins, name, the connections, the security you never had growing up. It's transparent. The cruel precision of her words revealed that she'd done her research on me, finding exactly the right insecurities to target. But something else she'd said caught my attention. How do you know about the changes I wanted to make to the wedding? I only discussed those with James and wrote them in my planning journal. Victoria's smirk confirmed my suspicion before she even spoke. Your password protection skills could use work. James and Olivia 2023 isn't exactly Fort Knox. I've been monitoring your planning document for months. The violation of privacy left me speechless. Victoria had been reading my private thoughts, my plans, perhaps even the personal notes I'd written about my hopes for our marriage. You had no right, I finally managed. No right to access my private files, no right to change our wedding plans, and absolutely no right to invite Caroline. Victoria stood, gathering her things. I have every right to protect my family from someone who clearly doesn't belong. You'll never be a real Collins, Olivia. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for everyone. She paused at the door. Oh, and don't bother running to James about this. Who do you think approved the venue change? He knows what's expected of a Collins wedding. I sat alone in the meeting room long after Victoria left, my mind racing. Was she telling the truth about James approving these changes? Had he been complicit in this takeover all along? When I finally confronted him that evening, his reaction was worse than anything Victoria could have said. I didn't exactly approve everything, he hedged, avoiding my eyes. But Mom and Victoria made some compelling points about the venue size and family traditions. They changed everything, James. Everything. And Victoria invited Caroline, your ex-fiancée. Were you ever going to tell me you were engaged before? James had the grace to look ashamed. It wasn't relevant. We broke up years ago. It became relevant when your sister invited her to our wedding. I was shouting now, months of frustration boiling over. Can't you see what Victoria is doing? She's deliberately trying to hurt me, to push me away. James ran his hands through his hair, his go-to stress gesture. Victoria can be difficult, I know, but she means well. She wants the wedding to be perfect. Perfect for whom? Not for me. Not for us. For your family, for their social standing, for everyone except the bride. I was crying now, hating the weakness but unable to stop. When are you going to stand up for me, James? When are you going to put us first? His silence was deafening, stretching between us like an unbridgeable chasm. Finally, he sighed. Let me talk to Victoria, okay? I'll sort this out. But his words lacked conviction, and in that moment I realized a devastating truth. James would always choose the path of least resistance. He would always prioritize peace with his family over standing up for me. And I had to decide if I could live with being second best for the rest of my life. Later that night, as James slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, Victoria's words echoing in my mind. You'll never be a real Collins. Maybe she was right, but not for the reasons she thought. Maybe I would never be a Collins because being one seemed to require surrendering your backbone, your individuality, your very self to the collective family will. For the first time, I allowed myself to seriously question whether this marriage was what I really wanted, whether loving James was enough to justify the price his family was demanding I pay. The week after discovering Victoria's wedding coup, I called in sick to work, something I'd never done without legitimate illness. I needed space, time to think without James's placating words or Victoria's venom clouding my judgment. Our apartment suddenly felt suffocating, filled with engagement gifts and wedding magazines that now seemed like props in a play I wasn't sure I wanted to perform in. I packed an overnight bag and texted James that I needed a few days at Maya's place to clear my head. His response was telling, "Take all the time you need. I'll smooth things over with Mom and Victoria about the wedding changes. Not, I'm sorry, or I'll fix this." Just another promise to manage his family's expectations rather than support mine. Maya welcomed me with open arms, no questions asked until I was ready to talk. We'd been friends since college, roommates for 3 years before I moved in with James. She'd witnessed my journey from insecure foster kid to confident professional, and she'd never liked how I changed around the Collins family. "You shrink yourself," she'd observed once after a dinner with them, "like you're trying to take up less space." After ordering takeout and opening a bottle of wine, I finally broke down and told her everything, from Victoria's cruel words at Weiss, the engagement party to the wedding planning takeover and the Caroline revelation. Maya listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly concerned. When I finished, she set down her wine glass deliberately. "Liv, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think before you answer. If Victoria and the Collins family weren't in the picture, would you still want to marry James?" The question hit me like a bucket of cold water. I'd been so focused on Victoria's behavior that I hadn't fully examined James's role in all this. "I love him," I said automatically. Maya nodded. "I know you do. But that's not what I asked. Do you want to marry him, knowing what you know now about how he handles conflict? About how he prioritizes his family's wishes over yours?" I stared into my wine glass, searching for clarity. "He's not a bad person, Maya. He's just conflict-averse. He wants everyone to be happy." "But everyone can't be happy in this situation," Maya pointed out gently. "And when forced to choose, he consistently chooses their happiness over yours. What does that tell you about your future together?" The truth of her words settled heavily in my chest. James wasn't malicious like Victoria, but his passive acceptance of her behavior, his unwillingness to establish boundaries with his family, was its own kind of betrayal. "I grew up without a family," I said finally, tears welling. "Maybe I've been so desperate to belong somewhere that I've been willing to accept things I shouldn't." Maya reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "You deserve to be more than tolerated, Liv. You deserve to be celebrated just as you are." That night, sleeping on Maya's couch, I dreamed of Mrs. Thompson, my last foster mother. She'd been a quiet, dignified woman who took in teen girls that other homes had rejected. The day I aged out of the system, she'd given me a simple silver bracelet. "Your worth isn't determined by others," she told me. "It comes from within. Never forget that." I woke up reaching for that bracelet, which I still wore every day. Somehow in the whirlwind romance with James, in my desire to finally have the family I'd always craved, I'd forgotten Mrs. Thompson's wisdom. I'd allowed Victoria and the Collins family to make me question my worth, to make me feel like I should be grateful for their conditional acceptance. Over the next 2 days, I did some serious soul-searching. I reread old journals, looked at photos of myself before and after meeting James, and realized with startling clarity how much I'd changed. The confident, independent woman who had put herself through college and built a successful career had slowly been replaced by someone who constantly sought approval, who doubted her own judgment, who apologized for taking up space. I'd been so focused on becoming a Collins that I'd been losing Olivia Mitchell in the process. On the 3rd day, Maya came home from work to find me surrounded by wedding magazines, methodically tearing out pages. "Spring cleaning?" she asked, setting down her bags. I looked up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. "I'm taking back my wedding. And if that's not possible, then I'm taking back myself." Maya smiled, recognizing the return of the friend she'd known. "So you're not calling it off?" I considered the question carefully. "Not yet. I love James, and I think he loves me. But something has to change. I can't keep shrinking myself to fit into their world. Either we build our own world together, or we don't have a future. That evening, I returned to our apartment. James was waiting anxiously, looking like he hadn't slept well. "I've been so worried," he said, pulling me into a hug. "I tried calling." "I needed space," I explained, gently extracting myself. I needed to remember who I am without all the Collins family drama. James's expression fell. "Liv, I'm sorry. About the wedding changes. I told Victoria she went too far. We can change things back." "This isn't just about the wedding," I said, motioning for him to sit down. "It's about us. About our future. James, do you realize that in every conflict with your family, you choose the path that keeps them happy, even at my expense?" He started to protest, but I held up a hand. "Think about it. Really think. When Victoria insulted me at our engagement party, you made excuses for her. When she took over our wedding planning, you went along with it. You even kept your previous engagement secret because it might cause waves." James looked genuinely shocked. "That's not fair. I'm caught in the middle here." "And that's exactly the problem," I replied. "You shouldn't be in the middle. We should be a united front. Partners. But instead, you're trying to please everyone. And the result is that no one's truly happy, least of all me." I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. "I need to know, James. If it comes down to a choice between standing up to your family or giving in to keep the peace, which will you choose?" His hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "I love them, Liv. They're my family. But I love you too. But when those loves conflict? When Victoria deliberately humiliates me or your mother overrides my wishes? Where do your loyalties lie then?" James ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I now recognized as avoidance. "Why does it have to be either or? Why can't we all just compromise?" In that moment, I saw our future with painful clarity. A lifetime of compromises that would always favor the Collins family traditions, preferences, and expectations. A lifetime of Victoria's subtle undermining, with James playing peacemaker rather than protector. "Compromise requires mutual respect," I said finally. "Your sister has made it abundantly clear that she doesn't respect me or my place in your life. And honestly, James, I'm starting to wonder if you do either." The hurt in his eyes was genuine, but so was my pain. "I do respect you, Liv. I love you." "Then prove it," I challenged. "Not with words, but with actions. If you want me to be your wife, then you need to show me that our relationship comes first, that we're building our life together, not just slotting me into the Collins family plan." As we talked deep into the night, I realized that this conversation was long overdue. James finally began to see how his conflict avoidance had enabled Victoria's behavior, how his silence had been interpreted as agreement. Whether it would be enough to change the dynamics remained to be seen, but for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Strong, clear-eyed, and unwilling to settle for less than I deserved. As I fell asleep that night, Mrs. Thompson's words echoed in my mind. "Your worth isn't determined by others. It comes from within." I had forgotten that fundamental truth, but I wouldn't make that mistake again. Whatever happened with James, whatever decision we ultimately made about our future together, I was reclaiming myself. And that felt more important than any wedding, any family name, any external validation I had been so desperately seeking. The morning after our heart-to-heart, James and I agreed we needed to address the situation with his family directly. No more passive acceptance, no more behind-the-scenes manipulations. We would meet with his parents and Victoria, lay everything on the table, and establish clear boundaries going forward. James seemed genuinely committed, though I could see the anxiety in his eyes at the prospect of confronting his family. "This won't be easy," he admitted as we drove to the Collins estate that Sunday. "They're not used to being challenged." I reached over to squeeze his hand. "I know, but if we're going to have any chance at a healthy marriage, this has to happen." Eleanor answered the door herself, surprise registering on her face when she saw me. "Olivia, we weren't expecting you. James mentioned he was coming for lunch, but—" "I asked her to join us," James said firmly, taking my hand as we stepped into the foyer. "We have some things we need to discuss as a family." Eleanor's expression tightened slightly, but she nodded. "Richard is in his study. I'll get him. Victoria arrived a few minutes ago. She's in the sunroom." The sunroom, I thought wryly. the scene of so many uncomfortable encounters. It seemed fitting this confrontation would happen there too. Victoria was scrolling through her phone when we entered, her expression shifting from boredom to sharp interest when she saw me. Olivia, what a surprise. Her tone suggested it was not a pleasant one. James didn't mention you'd be joining us today. Before I could respond, James spoke up. I asked Olivia to come. We need to clear the air about some things. Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. Oh? What things? Her innocent tone didn't match the calculating look in her eyes. We sat in uncomfortable silence until Eleanor returned with Richard, both looking concerned. James says you have something to discuss, Richard said, taking a seat beside his wife on the sofa opposite us. Victoria remained in her armchair, slightly apart from the group but watching intently. James took a deep breath, and I felt a surge of pride when he began speaking clearly and directly. There's been a situation developing that Olivia and I can no longer ignore. Victoria has been systematically undermining our relationship and taking over our wedding plans without our consent. Victoria immediately protested. That's ridiculous. I've only been trying to help since Olivia clearly doesn't understand our family traditions. Let me finish, James said, with a firmness I'd rarely heard from him. He proceeded to outline Victoria's behavior, the comments at the engagement party, the wedding planning takeover, the invitation to Caroline, the password hacking. With each example, Eleanor's expression grew more troubled, while Richard looked increasingly uncomfortable. Victoria's face flushed with anger as her actions were laid bare. When James mentioned the "you'll never be a real Collins" comment, Eleanor gasped audibly. Victoria, you didn't really say that, did you? Victoria's composure slipped for the first time. I was just being honest. Someone needed to make sure she understood what marrying into this family really means. And what does it mean? I asked, speaking up for the first time. All eyes turned to me. Does it mean surrendering my identity? Giving up my preferences, my voice, my autonomy? Because if that's what being a Collins requires, I'm not sure it's a family I want to join. The room fell silent. Richard cleared his throat. Olivia, surely you understand that certain traditions are important to us. The Collins name carries certain expectations. I do understand that, I replied. What I don't understand is why those traditions and expectations should completely override our wishes for our own wedding, our own life together. I turned to face Victoria directly. What I really don't understand is why you've been so determined to push me out from day one. What did I ever do to make you hate me so much? Victoria's mask of politeness dropped completely. You want to know why? Because you're an opportunist. I've seen how this plays out before. Someone from nowhere with no family, no connections, suddenly infiltrating our world. Next thing you know, James is disconnected from his family, our traditions are discarded, and the Collins legacy is diluted. The naked prejudice in her words shocked even her parents. Victoria! Eleanor exclaimed. But Victoria wasn't finished. Let's be honest about what this is. You saw James with his family money and connections, and you saw your ticket to the life you never had. The stable family, the social standing, all of it. Her words were cruel, but her voice shook slightly, revealing something beneath the venom. Fear, perhaps. Insecurity. I took a deep breath, determined to maintain my composure. You're right about one thing, Victoria. I do want a family. I've wanted one since I was 7 years old and lost mine in a car accident. But you're wrong if you think I'm after the Collins name or money. I fell in love with James despite his family, not because of it. I looked directly at Eleanor and Richard. I have my own career, my own accomplishments. I put myself through college working 3 jobs. I've built a life I'm proud of. I don't need the Collins money or connections. What I wanted was to be part of a family that would accept me for who I am. I turned back to Victoria. But you've made it abundantly clear that will never happen. James reached for my hand, squeezing it supportively. This isn't just Olivia's problem, he said to his family. This is about respect. Victoria, you've disrespected my fiancé, my relationship, and my ability to make my own choices. You've gone behind our backs, made decisions that weren't yours to make, and deliberately tried to hurt someone I love. Victoria's expression hardened. I was protecting you, James, like I've always done. I don't need your protection, James replied firmly. I need your respect. Olivia is going to be my wife. That means she's going to be family. If you can't accept that, if you can't treat her with basic decency, then we have a serious problem. The tension in the room was palpable. Richard finally broke the silence. I had no idea things had gotten this out of hand. He looked at Victoria with disappointment. Accessing private accounts? Inviting James's ex to the wedding? Victoria, that's completely inappropriate. Eleanor nodded slowly. I knew you were helping with the wedding planning, but I didn't realize you were making changes without Olivia's consent. She turned to me with what appeared to be genuine remorse. Olivia, I owe you an apology. I should have been more aware of what was happening. Victoria stood abruptly. So that's it? You're all taking her side now? After everything I've done to maintain our family standards? This isn't about sides, James said wearily. It's about respect. Olivia and I are getting married. We're starting our own family. You can either support that or not, but you don't get to interfere or undermine us. Victoria looked from face to face, seemingly shocked to find no allies. In a last desperate move, she turned to me. Someone from your background should be grateful we're accepting you at all. The room fell silent at this final, brutal insult. Even Victoria seemed to realize she'd gone too far. Eleanor stood, her face pale with anger. Victoria, that's enough. You will apologize to Olivia immediately. But I was done accepting hollow apologies. Actually, I don't want her apology, I said, rising from my seat. What I want is for this behavior to stop. Completely. And if it doesn't, James and I will need to reconsider not just Victoria's role in the wedding, but all of your involvement going forward. It was a bold statement, one that could have backfired terribly. But to my surprise, Richard nodded. That's fair. More than fair, given the circumstances. Victoria looked at her father in disbelief. Dad, you can't be serious. Richard's expression was firm. I've heard enough, Victoria. Your behavior has been inexcusable. You will step back from the wedding planning entirely, and you will find a way to make this right, or there will be consequences. Victoria stormed out without another word, the front door slamming moments later. In the uncomfortable silence that followed, Eleanor surprised me by moving to sit beside me. Olivia, I'm truly sorry. I've been so focused on traditions and doing things the Collins way that I didn't consider what you might want. That was wrong of me. Her apology seemed sincere, though I wondered if it would translate to actual change. Richard added his own apology, acknowledging that they had allowed Victoria's behavior to continue unchecked for too long. As we drove home later, James reached for my hand. I'm proud of us, he said quietly. That couldn't have been easy for you. Or for you, I acknowledged. Standing up to your family took courage. He nodded thoughtfully. It did, but it also felt right. Like I was finally being honest about what matters most to me. It was a start, I thought. A significant one. But as we pulled into our apartment complex, I knew the real work was just beginning. Victoria's hostility wouldn't disappear overnight, and years of family dynamics wouldn't change with a single confrontation. The question was whether James would maintain his newfound backbone, and whether his parents' apparent remorse would translate to respect going forward. Only time would tell if today's confrontation was truly a turning point or merely a temporary ceasefire in a longer war. But for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. Not because I believed Victoria would suddenly embrace me as a sister, but because James and I had finally stood together as partners. Whatever came next, we would face it united, and that meant everything. The days following our confrontation with the Collins family were strangely quiet. Victoria had gone completely silent. No texts, no calls, no unexpected appearances at wedding vendor meetings. James's parents made cautious attempts at reconciliation, sending a thoughtful note acknowledging their role in the situation and expressing genuine hope that we could move forward together. While I appreciated their efforts, I wasn't ready to simply pretend nothing had happened. The wounds were still too fresh, the trust too damaged to return to business as usual. After careful consideration, I decided it was time to take concrete actions to reclaim our wedding and establish clear boundaries. The first step was to address Victoria's wedding planning coup. I'm meeting with Melissa today to reset everything, I told James over breakfast. The venue, the flowers, the menu, all of it. But I want to be sensitive to your family's traditions too. Are there any that are truly important to you? James considered the question seriously. The Collins family crest on the cake is something my grandparents would appreciate. And maybe the traditional first dance song? But honestly, Liv, the rest is just pomp. I want our wedding to reflect us, not just my family history. His answer reassured me that he was still committed to our united front. That afternoon, I met with Melissa, who seemed relieved that the tension between me and Victoria had been addressed. I've been in an impossible position, she admitted. Victoria was so insistent, and with Eleanor backing her. I understand, I assured her. But going forward, you'll be working directly with James and me. Any changes must be approved by both of us in writing. With Melissa's help, I meticulously undid Victoria's changes, restoring our original venue, the historic greenhouse with its soaring glass ceilings and lush greenery. We reverted to our chosen menu of locally sourced, seasonal fare, though I did incorporate a traditional Collins family dessert as a respectful nod to James's heritage. The seating chart was completely redesigned, ensuring my friends had proper placement and, most importantly, removing Caroline from the guest list entirely. Next came the difficult task of addressing Victoria's inappropriate gifts. I carefully packed each one, wrapping them in their original packaging where possible. With each item, I included a short, polite note. Thank you for thinking of us. But this isn't quite right for our home. Best wishes, Olivia. It was cordial but firm, returning the unwanted items without apology or explanation. I was returning boundaries, not just gifts. The Collins family registry presented a more complex challenge. After discussion with James, we created a second, separate registry that truly reflected our taste and needs as a couple. For friends who had asked about gift ideas, we quietly directed them to this new registry. For the Collins family connections, who would inevitably follow Victoria's lead, we left the original registry intact. It's a compromise, I explained to James. Your family gets the formal china they think we need, and our friends can give us things we'll actually use. The most significant decision, however, was removing Victoria from the wedding party. I had never actually asked her to be a bridesmaid, but Eleanor's assumption had somehow made it official in the family's mind. I drafted a carefully worded email to Victoria, copying James, Eleanor, and Richard. After careful consideration of recent events, James and I feel it would be best if you attend our wedding solely as a guest, rather than as part of the wedding party. We hope you understand this decision and will respect our wishes going forward. James read it twice before nodding his approval. It's direct without being cruel. Send it. Within minutes of sending the email, James's phone exploded with calls from his parents and Victoria. He silenced it, sliding it across the table. They can wait. This is our decision, not a negotiation. His resolve strengthened my own. To replace Victoria in the wedding party, I asked Maya to be my maid of honor, a role she should have had from the beginning. For the seating chart, I made one final symbolic change. Victoria's prime reception seat, originally placed at the family table near the couple, was reassigned to my coworker, Diane, who had been unexpectedly supportive throughout the entire ordeal, offering advice and perspective when I needed it most. Is that petty? I asked James, showing him the change. He considered it briefly before shaking his head. It's not petty to surround yourself with people who genuinely support you on our wedding day. That's just self-care. His perspective had shifted so dramatically from the conflict-avoidant man who had made excuses for his sister's behavior. The final piece of reclaiming our wedding was selecting a new coordinator to replace Victoria. Maya recommended her cousin Rebecca, a professional event planner who specialized in personalized weddings that told a couple's unique story. When we met with Rebecca, her first question was, "What matters most to you two about this day?" Not what traditions we needed to uphold or what would impress the guests, but what would make the day meaningful for us. It was exactly the perspective we needed. Throughout this process of reclaiming our wedding, James remained steadfast. He fielded calls from his parents, maintaining our united position without wavering. When his mother tried to argue for Victoria's inclusion in the wedding party, for family harmony, James gently but firmly refused. This is our wedding, Mom. Victoria made her choice when she decided to undermine our relationship repeatedly. There are consequences to that choice. I overheard him on the phone with Victoria as well, his voice calm but resolute as she apparently alternated between anger and attempts at manipulation. No, Vic, this isn't Olivia controlling me. These are our joint decisions. If you want a relationship with us going forward, you need to accept that Olivia is my priority now. Hearing him draw that line clearly, without hesitation, healed something in me that had been broken during the months of watching him prioritize family peace over our partnership. As our reclaimed wedding plans took shape, I found my enthusiasm returning. The day was beginning to feel like ours again, a celebration of our love and commitment rather than an exercise in Colin's family traditions. More importantly, the process of taking back control had strengthened our relationship. James and I were communicating more openly, making decisions together, and presenting a united front to the world. Whether Victoria ever accepted me or not seemed less important now. What mattered was that James and I had found our way back to each other, stronger and more united than before. The ultimate test came 3 weeks after our confrontation, when Eleanor invited us to Sunday dinner. "I think we should go," James said cautiously. "Not to pretend everything's fine, but to establish our new normal. To show them we're still family, but with boundaries." I agreed, though not without apprehension. As we drove to the Collins estate, James reached for my hand. "Whatever happens in there, we're in this together. You and me against the world if necessary." That commitment gave me the courage to walk through the front door, head held high, ready to face whatever awaited us inside. To my surprise, the evening wasn't the disaster I'd feared. Victoria was notably absent, having other commitments according to Eleanor. Richard made visible efforts to engage me in conversation about my work and interests, while Eleanor showed me a family photo album, this time focusing on James's childhood rather than Colin's family history. They weren't perfect, but they were trying, and that meant something. As we left that night, Eleanor hugged me briefly. "I hope you know that we do want you in this family, Olivia," she said quietly. "It may take time for all of us to adjust, but you make James happy, and ultimately that's what matters most." Her words weren't a magical solution to all our problems, but they were a start. A recognition that perhaps there was room for me in the Collins family after all. Not as a carbon copy of what they expected, but as myself, with all my differences and unique perspectives. As James and I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just for our wedding day, but for our future together. By standing up for ourselves, by reclaiming our power as a couple, we had changed the dynamic. The road ahead wouldn't be without challenges, but for the first time, I believed we had the tools and the commitment to face those challenges together. Our wedding day dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the soaring glass panels of the historic greenhouse we'd chosen as our venue. As I stood in the small bridal suite, Maya arranging my veil with careful hands, I felt a surreal calm. After everything we'd been through, after all the battles and tears and difficult conversations, we had somehow made it here. To this day, that was truly ours. "You look incredible," Maya said, stepping back to admire the simple, elegant gown I'd chosen. Not a traditional Collins bride's dress with its layers of lace and obligatory family pearls, but a sleek, modern design that made me feel both beautiful and authentically myself. "Are you nervous?" I considered her question carefully. "Not about marrying James, but I am wondering how the family dynamics will play out today." Victoria had ultimately been invited as a regular guest, after several conversations with James and his parents. She had offered a stilted apology, clearly orchestrated by Eleanor, which I had accepted with equal formality. We both understood it was a peacekeeping measure rather than a genuine reconciliation, but it was a starting point. "Just focus on James today," Maya advised, adjusting a strand of my hair. "This is about you two, not the Collins family drama." She was right, of course. As I prepared to walk down the aisle, I reminded myself that this day belonged to James and me. The greenhouse looked magical, transformed with wildflowers and twinkling lights that created the enchanted garden feeling I'd always wanted. Our guests were a balanced mix of my friends and colleagues, James's family connections, and the people who had supported us as a couple. As the music began and I took my first steps down the aisle, I saw James waiting for me, his expression a mixture of awe and love that melted away any lingering anxiety. I barely registered the Collins family in the front row, Victoria sitting stiffly beside her parents. All I could see was James, the man who had chosen me, who had ultimately stood beside me when it mattered most. Our vows were personal, promises we had written together during those difficult weeks of reclaiming our relationship. James's voice was steady as he committed not just to loving me, but to building a life that honored both our needs, to creating new traditions together, to standing with me as a partner in all things. When he slipped the ring on my finger, his eyes locked with mine, I felt the last pieces of doubt dissolve. This was right. We were right. The reception that followed was unexpectedly joyful. Without Victoria's controlling influence, the atmosphere was relaxed and genuine. Eleanor and Richard made visible efforts to welcome my friends, engaging them in conversation and showing interest in their lives. Several of James's relatives sought me out to express their support, a few even confiding that Victoria's behavior had long been a source of family tension. "She's always needed to be the center of attention," James's cousin Melissa whispered. Ever since they were kids. When James brought Caroline home, Victoria did the same thing, though Caroline just put up with it to keep the peace. This revelation explained so much about the dynamics I'd observed. Victoria's issue wasn't just with me, it was with anyone who threatened her position in her brother's life. Dinner was delicious, the locally sourced menu earning compliments even from the Collins family traditionalists. Our cake featured a small, tasteful rendition of the family crest alongside our monogram, a visual representation of the balance we'd struck between honoring tradition and creating something new. I noticed Victoria watching as we cut the cake, her expression unreadable. But when our eyes briefly met across the room, she gave a small, tight nod that felt like the closest thing to acceptance I could expect. The most meaningful moment came during James's speech. After thanking guests for coming, he raised his glass and looked directly at me. "Olivia, you've taught me what true partnership means. You've shown me that love requires courage sometimes. The courage to stand up for what matters even when it's difficult. I promise to remember that lesson every day of our lives together." His words brought tears to my eyes, acknowledging our journey without dwelling on the painful parts. Eleanor approached me later as I stood watching James dance with Maya during a break in the festivities. "You've created something beautiful here," she said, gesturing around the room. "Different from what I imagined, but lovely in its own way." She hesitated before adding, "I hope you know that we are trying, Olivia. It may not always be perfect, but we do want to welcome you properly." "Thank you," I said sincerely. "That means a lot to me." And it did. This acknowledgement that we were all learning, all adjusting to new realities and relationships. As the night progressed, I found myself sitting beside Diane, my coworker who had replaced Victoria in the seating chart. "Having fun in your VIP seat?" I asked teasingly. She laughed, gesturing toward the Collins family table where Victoria sat alone, Eleanor and Richard having moved to mingle with other guests. "Worth every bit of drama, I'm guessing." I followed her gaze, feeling not triumph, but a surprising hint of compassion. Victoria looked isolated, despite being surrounded by family friends. Her need to control, to dominate, had ultimately left her alone on a day of connection and celebration. "It wasn't about the seat," I said quietly. "It was about being valued, being seen for who I actually am." Diane nodded understanding. "Well, from where I'm sitting, you've won more than a battle over a seating chart. You've found your voice. Not everyone manages that." Her observation stayed with me as the evening continued. I had found my voice, and more importantly, James had found his. We'd created boundaries that would serve us well in our married life, establishing from the beginning that we were a unit, partners who supported each other even when it was difficult. After our honeymoon, a 2-week escape to a quiet coastal town far from family expectations, James and I began the work of building our life together. We established new rituals that honored both our backgrounds, Sunday brunches that were casual and welcoming, unlike the formal Collins family dinners, holiday celebrations that blended traditions, weekends spent with friends who supported our relationship. We maintained contact with James's family, but on our terms. Dinners at the Collins estate became monthly rather than weekly occurrences. When Victoria tested boundaries, as she occasionally did, James addressed it immediately rather than making excuses. Slowly, tentatively, a new dynamic emerged. Eleanor called occasionally just to chat, showing interest in my work and life without the evaluating undercurrent I'd previously felt. Richard invited us to events as a couple, making efforts to introduce me as James's wife, rather than simply attaching me to the Collins name. Even Victoria showed small signs of change, though our relationship remained formal and careful. She sent a surprisingly thoughtful gift for our first anniversary, a custom photo album with a note saying simply, "Building new memories together." It wasn't forgiveness or friendship, but it was acknowledgement, and that was something. One year, after our wedding, James and I returned to the greenhouse venue for dinner, reminiscing about the journey that had brought us there. Any regrets? He asked as we sipped wine in the same space where we'd exchanged vows. I considered the question seriously. About marrying you? Never. About how everything unfolded with your family? Actually, no. As painful as it was, I think we needed to go through that fire to become who we are now. James nodded thoughtfully. It forced me to grow up in ways I needed to stop trying to please everyone and start standing for something. He reached for my hand across the table. I'm sorry it was so hard, but I'm grateful for where we landed. As we walked hand in hand through the garden afterward, I reflected on the lessons of our journey. I had wanted a family so desperately that I'd nearly lost myself trying to fit into one that wasn't ready to accept me as I was. The irony was that in finding the courage to stand up for myself, to draw boundaries and demand respect, I had actually created the possibility for genuine family connections based on mutual respect rather than conformity. The most valuable lesson wasn't that love conquers all. It was that love requires courage and work from both partners. It requires standing together when faced with external pressures, creating boundaries that protect your relationship, and sometimes making difficult choices about where your priorities lie. Family could be wonderful and nurturing, but it could also be complicated and challenging. The key was building relationships based on authenticity and respect, whether with the family you were born into, the family you married into, or the family you chose along the way. As James and I created our own definition of family, one based on acceptance rather than conformity, I finally understood what Mrs. Thompson had tried to teach me all those years ago. Your worth isn't determined by others. It comes from within. And when you truly believe that, you become capable of forming relationships that enhance your life rather than diminish it. My journey from unwanted foster child to confident wife hadn't been easy. But standing there with James, secure in our partnership and the boundaries we'd established, I knew it had been worth every difficult moment. We had fought for our right to define our own relationship, our own wedding, our own family dynamics. And in that fight, we had discovered not just each other's strength, but the true meaning of family. One that had nothing to do with names or traditions and everything to do with love, respect, and acceptance. Thank you so much for taking the time to hear my story. Has anyone else ever had to set boundaries with difficult in-laws or future in-laws? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to hear more life experiences that might help you navigate your own relationships. Remember, standing up for yourself doesn't mean you don't love others. Sometimes it's the most loving thing you can do for everyone involved, including yourself. Wishing you all the courage to create relationships that honor your worth and bring true joy to your life.